Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here. We're out here in Alberta in the early morning. We could be driving our kids to school, but instead we're playing with a brand new Sony a7R 5, Sony's latest offering of their high-resolution series of cameras. Let's take it out here and see what we get. I know it's kind of a bad sign if you're going to go to a motel and you got mold control in the window. I don't know, that's a loss of a star on Yelp for sure. So I'm first looking at the Sony a7R 5 and I'm looking at the body, I'm playing with it, I'm shooting with it, I'm looking at the technology involved. The only thing that really stands out as a new, unique feature for Sony is this new processor for deep learning technology, which promises to have more advanced autofocusing capabilities. Now, we're going to put a pin in that because we're absolutely going to talk about that. We've got a body design here which basically looks like an a7 IV. It's a very functional body design. It's got the new menu system, which you know we love from Sony, and it has the same 60 megapixel sensor that you find in the a7R 4, and that is an excellent sensor. Tons of detail, good dynamic range. I mean, we really do like the images that it produces. But this also means that when we look at this camera, it's really kind of just an evolution of this series. That being said, though, it really reminds me of when I played with the Sony a7R 3 way back when. We said the same thing versus the a7R 2. I mean, yes, we've got some changes, but it's basically the same 42 megapixel sensor. What's really changed? And yet, enough change to make the a7R 3 one of Sony's most popular cameras of all time. So let's see if the changes here make this a future hit for Sony. So if you are moving up to the Sony a7R 5 from one of the older bodies, what are you going to notice body-wise that you're going to really enjoy? Well, that upper command dial that you can customize is great. I like the fact that it does have a true locking switch function. Here on the side of the body, we have two card slots, but they've now updated them to CF Express Type A / SD card slots. And this really does expand a lot of the shooting capabilities for burst mode. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. Now, if you're going to use this camera as a hybrid photo video shooter, I love the fact that we got that selector switch right under the mode dial. Lets you go between photo, video, and your slow motion, quick motion video features. Just keeps things organized. It keeps the menu specific for those different settings. I really do like that feature. We also have an upgrade here with the EVF. Now, we've seen this before, but it's pretty much the best EVF that you can get. It is Sony's 9.44 million dot EVF. Incredibly high resolution. I love it for playback because you really can see the detail that's involved with that high resolution 60 megapixel sensor. And on the back, we've got another big change when it comes to displays. Look at this. They have now put on a fully articulating LCD, but more than just that, it also then does articulate out of the body this way. So very interesting. I mean, I think for any photo shooter, you're going to find that works for you. For any video shooter, you're going to enjoy the flexibility as well. Now, what about shooting speeds on this camera? Have they improved over the a7R 4? Well, not really. I mean, some things have improved. We'll talk about it. But you're still limited, basically, to 10 frames per second shooting mechanical shutter mode or electronic shutter mode with JPEGs or compressed RAWs. Now, what we do have here, which is a great feature, is we now do have lossless compressed RAW, something we've seen on some of the newer Sony bodies. This is the first a7R series camera to have that. This is excellent because you're saving card space and you're not getting a quality hit image quality wise. However, it does slow down your frame rate closer to 7 frames per second roughly. So that is something to keep in mind. If you want that 10 frame per second shooting, you still have to stick with compressed RAWs. But one thing that we did really notice is a big improvement was the buffer on this camera. Now that we've got those CF Express A slots, if you're using a CF Express A card, basically I couldn't get the camera to stop shooting in, well, JPEG of course, but even compressed RAW and lossless compressed RAW, it just kept going until I was basically tired of waiting. So that seems effectively limitless. It's funny though, with all of the upgraded technology we're seeing in this body from a lot of the other higher end Sony bodies, I was disappointed to find out that the mechanical shutter here is nothing special. I mean, you know, all modern mechanical shutters last a lot of shots, and I mean, it's got a 250th of a second flash sync. That's not terrible, but I really would have liked to have seen the mechanical shutter mechanism from the Sony A1. In fact, I'd trade that for the EVF, frankly, because the fact of the matter is, the Sony A1 had a really fast reading electronic shutter. I mean, you're kind of intending to shoot that camera in electronic shutter mode only anyways. It didn't need that advanced shutter. This camera does need it because The readout speed on this sensor is frankly quite slow. You don't want to shoot this camera in electronic shutter mode very often because you're going to get a lot of weird diagonals, jello effect, rolling shutter. What I do see a lot of people using this camera for, though, is flash photography, studio photography, outdoors, trying to balance with ambient light, that kind of stuff. And that's where having the mechanical shutter speed from the A1, where you can sync up to 400th of a second, that would have been really useful. So up to this point, we've been talking about all the things that the a7R5 borrows from other Sony cameras, but now let's talk about a feature that's unique to this camera. The a7R5 has Sony's most effective IBIS unit to date. Their in-body image stabilizer is rated to 8 stops, and this is especially significant when coupled with this 60 megapixel sensor. The fact is, when you're hand holding a high megapixel sensor like this, any sort of micro blur, you really start to see it. You get away with it on lower megapixel cameras, but here you'll really notice that quite quickly. And you know, although it's hard to give a quantitative result, I'll give you some context here. I did a test shot, 135 millimeter focal length, and I'm able to get 1/10 of a second, even 1/5 of a second without losing too much of the detail in that 60 megapixel sensor. I consider that quite impressive. And even when I'm shooting at faster shutter speeds, 250th of a second, 500th of a second, I will normally burst fire shots to maximize my chances of getting something very sharp with no micro blur whatsoever, especially for our sample galleries. But here on this camera, I'm finding single shots, I'm getting nice detail, very stable. So that IBIS unit is absolutely fantastic to have in this body. There's some other upgrades that I should mention here. We've got the same high-res multi-shot mode that we've seen in other Sony bodies where, you know, the camera compiles multiple photographs together and you basically quadruple your megapixel count. But the a7R5 now also has the option to help control any motion in that. So if something's moving, the camera will attempt to control that and correct for it so you don't get weird blurry ghosts, things like that. So that's a nice upgrade. Also, we now have focus stacking as well, which is great when you're trying to get more depth of field. The camera will take multiple shots at different focus ranges. You can compile them again together to maximize your depth of field for landscapes, for macro. These are all nice features. But no, unfortunately, you cannot do any of that in camera. Yes, you have to use Sony's Edge software, which is proprietary. And no, we don't have the latest version of that software yet to be able to actually show you it does these features. But maybe down the road we will do that. Another thing I need to point out, this is nothing new. We've been complaining about this for a long time, but you still cannot process your RAWs in camera. I just don't know why they haven't done that. A lot of people are complaining about it for many years. It'd be a really handy feature. We were hoping to see it here, but looks like we're gonna have to keep waiting. Time to talk about autofocus. So the Sony a7R5 has another feature that you will not find on any other Sony bodies. It has a new AI processor. Now basically what Sony's telling us is these cameras have always had lots of deep learning data to reference from, but they haven't had the processing power to make full use of it until now. So this has a dedicated processor designed to maximize the use of that deep learning data. And what it means is, first off, quite a few new autofocusing modes. They're now calling this, instead of real-time autofocus, real-time recognition autofocus. So impactful that you actually get a brand new tagline. But what we are seeing that's substantial is some new features like motorsports and insect detect. And look, we did a test here on an insect. We found a bee, and actually I found this very impressive because first off, the bee is quite small on the frame. We got a flower with lots of patterns going on, repetition, very busy, and yet it picked up that, look, it picks up that bee beautifully, tracks it nice, and then when I take the shot, it's right where I want it as far as autofocus goes. So that worked out really well. They also say that the animal detect has been improved overall. It was already quite effective before, but what about the most dangerous animals of all? Humans. So testing this out, I mean, first I gotta say, I mean, Sony's real-time tracking autofocus was always good to begin with people. I mean, I was always impressed by how well it focused on the eye, did a good job of tracking subjects, and if a person turned away, it would basically turn into a real-time tracking box, just focus on their pattern and color, and as soon as it saw a face or eye, it would kick back to that. And it always did a really good job of that. But now what it does is also recognize more of the human form, and they call it human poses. Now, what I can see here ourselves when we're testing it is, look at lovely Jordan here, focusing on his eye beautifully. Now when he turns away, rather than just go to real-time tracking box, it actually gives us a box around his head, recognizing that that is the back of his head. And as he goes further away, you can now see something we haven't seen before either, where it now puts a box around his torso. And so, you know, it's always been tracking well. I've never had a problem with Sony's performance with autofocus on people, but here it just promises to be more effective, stickier, especially in sports situations where it's less likely to jump to another subject, for example. And overall, if you're improving on their already excellent autofocus, well, that just has to be a good thing. So is this a good hybrid camera? Well, let's go over to Jordan. He's been doing some testing. We'll see what he says.
Hey, it's Jordan to talk about the video capabilities of the a7R5, which Chris is actually filming me in 8K on right now.
Yes, but you're not pedaling. Pedal! Yeah.
So the nice thing about this sensor is it does have enough resolution for us to record an 8K image, but the thing is it actually has to crop in a noticeable amount in order to record the 8K video on that. The other thing is this is not a sensor designed for fast readout, so if you're shooting the 8K, as you can see in these examples, the rolling shutter is very noticeable. I would say bordering on atrocious.
You're breathing really heavy. Are you okay?
It's tiring. So if you're looking to avoid the rolling shutter issues of 8K, this does give you the option to switch over to 4K full width recording. And the rolling shutter performance is a lot better in this mode. The reason that is because this is subsampled video. So it's going to give you a much less detailed image than that 8K recording. And it's a real disadvantage compared to some cameras like the Canon R5, Nikon Z9 that give you oversampled 4K using the full resolution of the sensor. But fortunately, there is an option if you want a nice balance of both. Because now Chris has switched over to its Super 35 recording mode, and you can see our frame is quite a bit tighter, but now we're getting video that's oversampled from 6.2K recording, which incidentally is quite close to a lot of 26 megapixel sensors that are floating around out there. And with this, we're getting pretty decent rolling shutter performance, and we're getting the detail from that oversampled video record mode. If I were using this camera to capture video, I would mostly be using the Super 35 crop. That was a demonstration of the new real-time recognition system if you can't afford to hire an athlete. Aside from that, this does have a lot of the other features that we've seen in recent Sony cameras that I really like. Things like the beautiful S-Cinetone profile that's shooting me right now, breathing correction, their focus map. This has plug-and-play webcam support, and the new main menu option for quickly accessing video settings. They're all very useful and they're all present. But on top of that, I really want to take a minute to highlight the tilt and articulating LCD that Chris has already mentioned, because for video shooters, this is wonderful. Keeps the LCD from bumping into anything that you've got plugged into the side of the camera. And I love Panasonic's implementation, but this is even better because it also gives you the ability to tilt the screen down without flipping it out if you're doing any overhead shots. It's a wonderful system, and I hope we see it in a lot more video-centric Sony bodies. This would have been great in the FX30. Obviously, with the high-resolution sensor, I wanted to check overheating on this, and the 8K mode is the only one where I was able to get it to overheat. Now, Sony actually says you should be able to get 30 minutes in room temperature. I got quite a bit more than that. I actually got 42 minutes before the camera overheated. So as long as you're aware of that, you should be able to work around it. But using any of the sub-sampled modes, no overheating issues at all, even recording well over 2 hours. So basically with the Sony a7R5, we've got a whole bunch of really useful video tools tied to a sensor that's not really ideal for video capture. I'm really looking forward to seeing things like the fully articulating screen with the hinge being brought to future Sony cameras. But if you are a photographer looking for a high-resolution stills device and still capable video camera, especially if you stick to the Super 35 APS-C recording, then I think the a7R5 is going to be a great choice without having to go to the super high price of the A1.
So let's see if we've answered our original question here. You know, are the upgrades here worthwhile? Well, I think in a lot of ways, absolutely yes. I mean, everything that's been updated about this, I like. The new body design, the menu system, you know, the EVF. These are things that we want to see in Sony cameras going forward. But we also have a lot of brand new upgrades here that you will not find in any other cameras, and that cannot be updated in the future, really, with firmware. We've got that deep learning processing engine, which makes an autofocusing system that's already so convenient to use, just even more effective in more situations. We now have an 8-stop IBIS unit, which I think is absolutely well mated to this kind of camera. And we do have this fully articulating screen. And again, it's strange. I mean, some of these features we wish we would have on other Sony bodies, and I'm sure going forward we will. But for my kind of stuff, this is actually an amazing camera. Probably my favorite Sony body that I've used to date. The only two drawbacks that I can complain about again is really the fact that I think the A1 shutter would have been better suited in this camera. And of course the sensor has a really slow readout, which means it's not a great silent shooting camera. It's not a great video platform. But I do think that if you're looking at high resolution studio photography, landscapes, this will naturally be the choice for you. Even I think some wildlife photographers will appreciate the better autofocus for animal and insect shooting and will love that high resolution sensor, just give you that crop ability. If I'm shooting sports and action, I still think the faster burst rates of something like the Sony A1 will make it a better platform. But for a lot of people out there, if you're looking for a new Sony camera, I think this makes a lot of sense if you can afford the high price tag. Keep in mind though, just like we talked about with the a7R III and the a7R II, if you don't need the updates, if they're not really going to appeal to what kind of photography you're doing, if you don't need the latest and greatest autofocus or IBIS, an a7R IV will still give you that excellent image quality, and that could be a good, more affordable choice for you. But if you've been holding off for a while and you want to upgrade, this might be a fantastic choice for you. Leave your comments below. Let us know what you think about the new a7R V. Check out our sample gallery. We shot a lot of pictures on this camera. DPReview.com, link in the description below. Check out our Instagram and our Twitters. You can see the shots that we take on here, any other posts. Click the notification bell, do all the clicky clickies. We'd appreciate that, so that next time we come with a new video, you will see us there on another episode of DPReview TV.